Welcome home, neighbors.
Welcome home, neighbors.
Hello, neighbors.
We're listening from
Arizona,
Florida,
Maryland, New York, New Jersey,
Indianapolis,
California,
Utah,
Michigan,
Iowa,
Massachusetts,
Georgia, Canada,
Our home resort is
Animal Kingdom,
Polynesian,
Bay Lake Town,
Old Key West,
Riviera,
Boardwalk,
Alani Resort,
Hilton Head, Boulder Ridge, Copper Creek,
Grand Floridian,
Saratoga Springs.
Beach Club,
and Wilderness Lodge.
and you're listening to
and you're listening
You're listening to my
DVC.
Well, welcome home, everybody, to a special bonus edition of the My DVC Points Live. There has been so many questions and comments going on out there in the forums this week that I got with my good friend Joe Woofers, who answers a lot of questions in the forums and is just an all-around great, knowledgeable, helpful guy. And I said, Joe, let's do a live where we can do this. So I'd like to welcome to the show Joe Woofers.
Hello, hello.
Hey, Joe, how you doing tonight, my friend?
Very, very good. I'm fed. I'm ready to talk.
Oh, hey, fed and ready to talk. I don't know if I could beat that because my dinner was a little, scarfed down tonight before we got started here.
It's all good. I think my wife, she got it all done for me just in time. So
got it. Well, we were talking together about all of the crazy comments and the uneasiness that we see out there in the community on this Corona cancellations, and we kind of came to the conclusion a lot of people don't understand the DVC 101 stuff. So we wanted to just do a live where we could invite people in to ask some questions and kind of go over it all and then see how Corona has changed this and what it's going to change in the future. So our goal is to be helpful, and anytime our goal is to be helpful, respectful, and accurate conversations always have a link back to the official website. So we're going to be bringing up the website. We're going to be showing you guys some links and posting them in the comments tonight back to those kind of fun things. So I'm looking forward to that. So first up, let's talk about use year, Joe.
awesome. Probably the most common question I think we get out there, right? I think there's more questions about use year and how things work than anything else. So
yeah, it's one of these things that people just don't understand. And I'll tell you how I explain it to people, and then we'll get your take on it as well, because multiple explanations are really a good thing. So I look at it and I go, you have to understand timeshares and fixed weeks. Okay. When before DVC came around and they invented this flexible point system, use year is really the key to our flexible points. Okay. And you used to, I own week 37 every year. So sometime in early fall, you would come back in and have your week, and that was your use week. Well, when DVC came out, they wanted a system of flexibility that gave members a choice to move things around a little bit. And so they had to say, okay, we're going to sell you enough points, but you're going to have a year to use those points in and not a fixed use week. Okay. And so once we had that, now because we have flexibility, we have to have some rules around that, the flexibility, so that it's all not just a big log jam. Okay. Because when you buy a new 50-year contract, let's say you buy a 100-point contract at Riviera and it's 50 years long and you buy 100 points, you have 5,000 points. Okay. And what a use year does is it regulates the speed at which you can use your 500 or 5,000 points. And it says, hey, look, you can use 100 points a year, or with the banking and borrowing rules, you can use up to 300 in 1 year by combining, moving things around. So we'll talk about that tonight. But Joe, what's your take on use year? How do you explain it?
So, I mean, really what I like to do, we all know in the business world, we have fiscal years, right? And so I try to help people understand that when it comes to use year, it's just the fiscal year your points are allowed to be used. And you can move them 1 year forward, 1 year back, but there's always going to be the fiscal year that you have to start with. And I think it really gets people caught up when they start playing with like December use years and they're trying to look at a calendar and they're saying, wait a minute, my year starts December 1st, but the calendar is all about to start January 1st of the next year. And so things start to getting a little overlapping. But I mean, the way you said it is exactly right. We don't buy points in terms of like, they're not currency, right? They're not cash. Points are a fixed unit of time, and we can move that fixed unit of time 1 year forward, 1 year back, but we can't go any more than that.
Yep. And I like what you did with fiscal year as well, because a lot of companies, I think Disney is one of them, has an October fiscal year.
Yep.
Okay. It doesn't align up with the calendar year. And use year is like that, in that it does not ever line up with the calendar year because there is no January use year out there.
Correct.
Okay. So it's always going to cross a year because the earliest you can get is February. And so I have February for all of my points, which means my 2020 points, I can use them in January of 2021. Okay. Because that's the end of my use year or the fiscal year. I like that. I learned something new tonight as well.
There we go.
So if you guys have questions or comments about use year or things like that, we'll try to work them into the conversation. But we really wanted to come in and kind of go over use year, banking, borrowing, all of the DVC 101 kind of stuff to just try to answer some questions for some folks. So feel free to comment or question away if you guys have something. I know it's not the most lively topic tonight, but we think it's kind of necessary. And we're trying to get like a reference material that other people can come back in and watch as well. So
100%. As I said, I probably go back and I probably answer this question at least 3 or 4 times a week. And each situation is unique, right? Everybody's got different, there's 8 different use years, so it creates unique scenarios. But it's one of those things that it's like a light bulb for most people. They're like so confused how it all works. And then all of a sudden they get it right one time. And then they're like, oh, now it makes total sense. And then they can control their points for the rest of the contract and they're good to go. I just always feel bad that, somebody who's say they bought Old Key West in the mid 90s and they still think that they have to follow certain things. And I'm like, no, you're missing the point. And you're like, man, you lost 20, 25 years worth of enjoying this thing the right way because you were confused on how it works. So this is one of those fundamental things that once people get and grasp, it'll change the way they use their membership. Yeah. And so Gina's our off-air producer tonight, and she's kind of got this nice video or this nice FAQ up here of what is a use year. And she's going to put that into the actual link. So you'll see it on YouTube and Facebook here in the actual live show note links that are happening. And when it's all said and done, we'll also put our notes that we use to create this that has all the links as one document out there for people to come back in and look at and view as well. I'll probably put it onto the show notes for this particular site or this particular episode on my blog post. So yeah, Disney's saying a use year, it's a determined time, ownership interest, and it marks the time. They use this terminology when you receive your new allotment of points. I don't really like that because you have them all. Okay. They're on your contract. You just can't quite get to them all yet because the use year is a spacing mechanism. Well, and I think Vicky just posted a question kind of related to that we can dive into here to kind of explain some of that. So I see Vicky said that you don't have to wait for points to hit. And that's usually one of the biggest hiccups that people get to, right? They think that they got to wait till they can log into their dashboard and they can look at their points and they say, hey, I have these points. Now I can book with them. And the biggest thing that you can do is you can always book your home resort 11 months in advance or another resort 7 months in advance, as long as the points will be valid when you travel. And that's a big thing for people to understand. So say you want to travel in February of 2021, we're basically 11 months out. You don't have to wait. Say you have a September use year. You don't have to wait till your points arrive in September to book that February trip. You can book it right now.
Might be too late.
Yeah, exactly. That's where people I think that's why a lot of people that struggle with, hey, I can't find availability. It's like, well, you would have booked back 11 months, you would have had no problem. But because you were waiting till September for your points to hit and then trying to book for February, which is only 5 more months down the road. Yeah, that's why you're having problems.
Yeah, I look at it kind of like that old Wayne Gretzky quote, okay, where he talks about how are you so successful, where I go to where the puck's going to be. Okay, you got to put the points where the reservation's going to be. Exactly. Okay. So if you want a vacation in September of 2022, you got to have the points in the use year for September 22, according to your contract, because my contract is different than yours. Okay. So there's 8 different use years.
For example, for you with a February use year, September 2022, you want to use your 2022 points, whether that's banked from 2021 or borrowed from 2023, but you're sitting in that 2020 use year. Say for my December use year points, that's actually 2021. So then I've got to play back. So I can use my banked from 2020, current 2021, or borrow from 2022. But yeah, it's all about when the trip occurs. It's never about when you're actually clicking book the reservation. It's always about when does this trip line up with my use year as far as when I'm checking in and checking out.
Yeah, I guess the other helpful thing to know here is the points are already on your contract and they're already in the use years that you have until that thing expires. They're there. You might not be able to see them all, but until contract expiration, those points are all there. And you just have to move the points into the use year that the reservation hits.
Yep.
So,
and you make sure you do that before. That's one thing. Like we'll get into the banking scenario. You need to make sure you're banking before you actually go to book the trip, because it won't pull from the right points if you don't.
Yeah,
so,
that's a great point. That's a great point as well. And so Vicky asked a question about explaining holding. And if you'll hold with us, no pun intended, we'll get to that when we start talking about canceling reservations coming up. So the other thing I'd like to share is there's a really neat sales video on DVC members site, and we'll put a link to that out there as well. And if Gina, if you could bring that site up, I call it the starter video. It's the sales material video. It's where all of these information and everything else is shown. If not, I can share this as well. So yeah, so this video right here, it's a great 101 video. And keep in mind, it's all marketing material. It tells you how awesome DVC is because they want you to buy, but it really starts to lay out the terms for you. And I'd tell you to watch that video and then keep asking more questions and refining your knowledge so that you understand all the intricacies and gotchas. But it's a really great, helpful video. And then any more questions about use year? So
Vicky, you'd mentioned you'd asked about, like, as far as picking the right use year. I guess that's something we could dive into because it's a pretty simple question. Back in the day, back when DVC started we're getting up at almost 30 years ago now. They didn't really kind of pitch whatever use year. They just kind of gave you whatever you can. But the nice part is now with Facebook and all these other places, we can kind of help you guys make sure you buy the right use year that works for you. The best fundamental thing you can do is to buy a use year that slightly precedes when you're normally going to travel. So you mentioned you're a teacher. You're probably going to travel summer, maybe at Christmas. So you want to try to find one that maybe slightly precedes that summer travel. So something maybe like, there isn't a May use year, but you could look at like April or maybe June, something like that. That's going to get you your points right at the very beginning. And the reason we do that is if you were to cancel for whatever reason, say something comes up, kids get sick, break an arm, whatever it may be. If you have to cancel that trip, you'll still have upwards of 10, 11 months to rebook with those points or bank them to the next year. If you're traveling late in your use year, and this is what we're dealing with right now with all this COVID stuff, people that are traveling later in their use year and they go to cancel, they're past their banking window and they only have a couple months to use points before they're gone. So always try to buy one that slightly precedes your use when you're going to travel. So if you travel at Christmas, try to get one that's like October, for example, that's slightly before. That gives you plenty of time to use those points.
Yeah, you know what, Joe? I actually have an Excel spreadsheet that I built. I'll go ahead and share that, and we'll walk through that as well. I'll put that into the link for the show, and it's available in the files in the My DVC Points community section. But this is a good time to just go over this as well. So let me share this thing. I forgot that I had it.
Yeah, it's probably like the one that I've got where it basically covers every month to know what use years work and which ones don't.
Yeah. So basically, let's kill this banner here. If you come back into this spreadsheet and you start to tell this thing, maybe we'll get Joe, we'll ask you or we'll ask Gina to come in, one of the two. And like, how often do you go in January? So this is what I have. And I go every year, almost every year, occasionally, rarely, or not even with pixie dust. Okay. So for me, I go almost every year, but not quite. February, every year. March, rarely. April, rarely. May, rarely. Or May, almost every year. July, every year. August, every year. September, October, November, when school's in session. My wife's a teacher, not even with pixie dust. Okay. And then December is a rarely. We want to do it once, but I don't know that we're going to end up doing it a lot. So by just coming back in and telling us how often you're going to travel in those months, I can come over to the results tab and then start to lay out for you. Based on this deal, my number one use year would be December for the way I travel. Now I own February, and my guide tried to tell me that, but I didn't understand it when I bought. So I still come out pretty good for what I'm doing.
Yeah, you're
right?
off by one. Yeah, if you're pretty much off. December would be number one, but February is still not going to hurt you in any way. I'm looking at all the dates. I'm like, you're not going to have any problems, except for maybe if you travel in that one time in December.
Yeah.
You know?
But if you look at this, okay, and you look at the February use year, let me just come back in and let's look at December, okay? Because if this is the December use year for this, so when I travel in January, 5, that's just, I just used the numerical quantitative score here. But all of these are your bankable months, these first 8 months. And then you get into this 9th month, and it's still bankable if you cancel 31 days in advance. Okay. So you can still make a reservation in your 9th month and cancel it and be able to bank the points. Okay. Now, when you start getting into these last 3 months of your use year, so for a December guy, that would be October, or it would be September, October, November. What happens is if you cancel the reservation past your bank date, the end of the use year is when those points expire. Okay. So if you're booking in the last 3 months of your use year, you're in what I consider the danger zone, because if you cancel, you can't book them. You can go into a holding account, use the 60 days, but the end of that use year is a hard, brutal beast.
And that's what we're seeing right now with all this craziness. You know, you have all these people with with April use years, for example, or March use years, and they're like, their trip gets canceled. They were traveling in the second week of March, and their trip gets canceled, and they're like, I've got no time to rebook with this stuff before it's gone. There's just no way. Yeah. Because then that goes back to that whole, it's not when you book, it's when the trip occurs. So you can cancel that trip and you're like, oh, I'm all right, I can rebook right now. It's like, no, you got to have those points used by that date, not booked.
Yeah. So just looking at this chart, when you look at an April use year, May cancellations are brutal. Okay. Yes. And that's what people are understanding. And this is like a DVC 101 level of concept that, yes, you can go anytime, but there's something to be said for, having multiple use years so that you can always be booking in a green cell. Okay. If you could manage your points that way and you're going multiple times a year. If you're not going multiple times a year, you just kind of have to figure out which use year works best for you, which is kind of what my little ranking system does here.
Yep. And you're going to have those ones that maybe they travel like maybe twice a year, and those 2 times a year are close enough together that it kind of screws up in the sense of there's certain use year. They might not matter what use year they need to choose, because the banking dates are always going to have one that's going to be kind of in that gray danger zone and one's not. And you then at that point you book and you just try to make sure you plan your points accordingly out in the future to where you're not putting yourself in that pinch point.
Yeah. And by the way, this functionality will be in a future release of our app that's coming out. So Kenny's already got it on the radar to start coding, because we realize so many people have questions with it. And one of the things we're going to be adding to the calculator is we'll take in your contract information in your use year, and we'll tell you if you're booking a stay in January, what use year that falls in for your contracts right there in the app. So it'll be pretty cool, pretty slick. And I think it'll help a lot of people start to understand this. Let's see if there are any questions or comments on this before we come back around here. So
Rob, you said that there's only 8 use year months. Yeah. So the reason DVC chose that, and I've talked to a few kind of old veteran guides that have been around for a while. And the reason they chose 8 versus all 12 is they wanted to make sure that there was no kind of there's a few months that could get really confusing. Like take January, for example. January perfectly follows the calendar year, but the problem is all the contracts end on January 31st. When they're finally finishing up, and they didn't want to have a use year where it's like everybody in January is getting points, but then everybody after that's not for that final year. So there's some nuances that they tried to avoid to make things a little bit easier. But the other 8 use years, you see them. I think, are they on that screen right there, Chad? Yep. If not, I've got them here.
Yep. February, March, April. No Mays, no Julys, no Novembers.
That's it. Yep. The most tricky one to understand for people is when you get playing in the end of the year, the December, October ones.
Yeah, because your use year point number does not match up the calendar year Well, for December, 11 out of 12 months. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's where it starts to get tricky, right? So let's come back in and see this. And Caleb mentions a really good gotcha as well that's not ever talked about in the documentation. You can't have a trip that crosses your use year. Okay.
You can, but it's a logistical piece to put together. But it's pretty cool because that's actually one way you can actually use 4 years of points. I always tell people, like, if you're in a situation where you're like, I can't really get there, we're trying to plan out some points and they're like, I can only get there once in 4 years. That would be the one way you can maybe make it work, but it takes a lot of manual processing beforehand to stack all your points up perfectly that are when you're crossing over. But he's right.
Yeah. And the reason why that is because your use year ends, like mine with a February use year ends January 31st. They all have to be done. So I can put points in the 2021 use year and be there January 18th through the 31st. Okay. But if I want to continue,
February.
Yeah, I have to check out on the first because it's the night of, right?
Yep.
So, but then my next check-in has to be on points in the new use year. So even if it's the same resort, same everything, you have to check out and you have to check back in. And so, yeah, just as a power user tip, you can't walk a reservation across a use year either. So, that's another interesting fact for the power users that might be tuning in as well. So let's see if we can start.
The most you can walk is, I guess, would be 11. Yeah. From the very day one of your use year to whenever the trip occurs. So,
yeah. And so Caleb also comments that he's a teacher and he has a March use year. And he goes, I generally don't travel at Christmas, but it allows for a trip for March, spring break, summer, and October fall break before my banking window.
Yep. Because, your banking window is 10/31. So,
yeah. So if we were to look at that on here, he's saying, look, December for him is a yellow month. And if he's not going in January or February, March is an ideal use year because he's got all of that dark green and bankable time.
Perfectly executed.
Yeah. Well played there, Caleb. Your guy did you well. Okay. So, and then Vicky says, that's an awesome spreadsheet. Well, thanks for sharing. Yeah, it will definitely be in the My DVC Points community group. And if you go to mydvcpoints.com/live, you'll see all of the live shows and I'll put a link to it in the show notes as well. But we'll try to build that into a website where it's a little bit more user-friendly than Excel. Because if you're not an Excel junkie that knows how to do drop-downs, you're kind of dead. So that's my own technical doing and nerdiness coming out there. So if we've got no other questions about use year, let's come back into banked points and start talking about banking points. So let me stop sharing that one. We'll pull that down. So banking and borrowing. And as we've discussed tonight, it's all about when does your vacation occur according to your individual family's contractual use year. So that is the question. The points have to be in the use year that the vacation falls into. Okay. It is really that simple. And the way you get them there is they're either natively born there. So you have 2020 points that are natively born in 2020. Okay. But if you want to bank or borrow, you can pull or push points into that use year. Okay. But again, it all is where the reservation lands. So I think we've covered that. Is there any questions on banking, borrowing? And so banking, borrowing, or other kind of questions here. And Caleb threw me a pretty good compliment here. I'm going to throw up there. He goes, tip of the hat to My DVC Points, my real DVC guide. And well, thank you. I want to help people understand things, but I also want to come back into the official stuff from DVC and train people to go back in and use that website because there's a lot of not so great information out there. Okay.
And I'll tell you this. I don't think there's a question I've ever answered that I probably couldn't point somewhere on the website.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, Joe, how long have you been managing your parents' points, Joe?
So we joined in 01.
Okay. Yeah,
and it was pretty much I talked them into it, and I managed it from the whole thing. They just paid for it because I wasn't old enough yet. But I've been running the whole thing since. And then I've obviously, as I've become an adult in my own family, I've added on since then too. So
yeah, you're second generation DVC member is what I call it. You grew up DVC, and you grew up and then bought your own points. So I referenced that in this week's podcast, and I want to do another show on it because I just think it's so fascinating, right?
we look back, it's one of those things that my parents say it's the one thing in life that they spent money on that they're very happy with. You know, they've had a few things that have done okay, but DVC is the one thing that they were happy with completely, and it's set us up. We take family vacations still with everybody, all the siblings and everything. So
gotcha. And so Mark has a really good question here. He goes, banking, what's that? And banking, what's that? I'm the master of borrowing. And yeah,
I've probably only banked a couple times in 20 something years, so I get it.
Yeah, see, I do both all the time, but it's because I have relatively small contracts at multiple resorts so that I can always be using an 11-month advantage. And as I'm wrapping out my tour to DVC, I'm having to do everything now at the 7-month window, and it's kind of killing me. Because it's like, man, now I got to go through what everybody else does. So, but, so Vicky asked us questions. You can bank and borrow, but also buy one-time use points. And that is correct. So you can bank points into a use year. You can borrow points into a use year. And then you can get up to 24 one-time use points per use year.
So when we say that, let's take the 100-point example, right? You've got 100 points that are native to 2020 right now. Mm-hmm. You bank in from 2019, your 100, so now you're at 200, and say you borrow from 2021 for another 100, so you're at 300. You can add 24 total. You can't add 24 per use year and pull them back in together. It's just for the year the trip occurs.
Yep. So the most you could do with a 100-point contract would be 324 points. Yep. So, yep, that's a really good deal.
And that's per membership. You got to remember that too. So I always tell people, if you've got multiple use years, if you got points, multiple contracts with multiple use years, you get 24 per membership, not per contract. So, I mean, you can kind of piece some other stuff together if you're trying to pull things together. So,
yeah. And so, Gina, can you pull up this next website, the banking FAQs and point definitions? We'll get people to start using that one as well. Always like referring to the DVC website. It's just kind of my go-to for everything. And the more we can get people to just start looking at that's good. But I mean, and I say that as a content creator who helps people understand this as well, but you always want to go back to DVC, even the guides, the official policies. So
it's gotten a lot better over the last, say, 3 to 5 years. The website back in the day was not so great, but they've done put a lot of stuff in there now to where, I mean, you can pretty much get everything you need.
Yeah. And so Jim asked this questions here. He says 24 points per use year. Is this per contract? It's per membership number. Yep. And the way you get two different membership numbers is multiple use years or coming back in and having multiple titlings. So would get you a separate member numbers as well.
Yep.
And then John answers it and he also points out and says it's only at the 7-month mark. So your one-time use points are across all resorts. They have no home resort, so you can't use them until the 7-month mark. So, and then Brooke asks a great question here. Do you have to purchase all 24 points directly from Disney? Joe, do you want to answer that one?
Well, so I mean, in terms of the one-time use, yes, all of them have to come directly from Disney. That's the only one that can do the one-time use points. The other, I mean, essentially with one-time use, and people think that you're buying a specific point, you're actually just renting points from Disney up to 24. So it'd be no different than going to, say, DVC rental store and getting 24 points from them. But the nice part is when you do it directly from Disney in terms of the one-time use, they go into your account, they're yours. You get to use them just like if you were they were transferred in, which makes it a lot easier because if say you're short, maybe 5 points for a night or 10 points for a night, you get to go put it in and do that way. Whereas if you wanted to rent from DVC rental store, you'd have to have somebody book that one night for you, and then you'd book everything else and go through
a really complicated process of calling member services and transferring points. I did that once when we had a listener who had some points that were going to expire right about the time I was going on my May trip this year. And so he had enough to get me through some of them. So I just transferred him like 6 or 7 points, and then he booked it in my name.
Yep.
So that's always an option there as well, is you can go more than 24, but it has to come from another member, and then it's dicey and tricky. And I'm not a huge fan of that unless you really know the person.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of headaches to it. First off, I mean, one of the big drawing points, one of the rules is you're technically not supposed to take compensation for it. So most people are not just going to hand their points over for free. So in that sense, you're breaking a rule there. But the other battle is, you got to make sure that the person's right. You're going to kind of go in that route because most of the brokers won't, facilitate a transfer for you. And then there's a lot of other headaches to the transfer process, which we'll get into here in a little bit, as far as lining up use years and all that other stuff. When it comes to, you have a February use year and you send me points, I've got a December use year. I've got to match those two to make sure they work for the trip. So
yeah, that's true, because they transfer with the use year and they transfer with the native home resorts.
Yeah.
Okay. And that can't change. Okay. Nope. So it's a barrel of monkeys on transfers, but I think we answered that question fairly well. And then Mark said, I was misled with this. I thought I could buy the 24 per contract, and it's per member number.
And that lots of times that's a verbiage thing. A lot of people get confused with membership and contract, and they think they're the same thing, when in reality they're actually not. There are different nuances. You can have a membership can have multiple contracts under it, but one contract only constitutes one membership. So there's little nuances there, but lots of times it's just a verbiage thing. People get confused with it too.
And Vicky says, wow, not until the 7-month mark. This puts a wrinkle in my plan for 2021, but I'm glad you informed us. So, yep, that works. And Kathy asked a question here about RCI. And do you think I can move one-time points to RCI if I have my May trip canceled?
That is a big no.
So, okay. I've never looked into it, because to me, it was like the resort of last resort.
Yeah. So when points are deposited into RCI, they leave the DVC system for one. The one-time use points are technically not yours. They're Disney's. So you can't deposit them because they're not actually yours to do so in that sense.
Oh, was that her question about... Oh, yeah, it was one-time points. So yeah, that's a really good clarification there, because I just read that as her points from May. Okay.
But to answer Kathy specifically, DVC right now, if you have purchased one-time use points for a trip that gets canceled due to COVID-related issues, they are refunding those one-time use points. So if it comes to that, you'll be okay that way.
Got it. And Dustin, you're absolutely positively welcome. Anytime you throw a question out there, if you've got one. So we'll be glad to do our best to try to answer it and point you back to the DVC website for the answer. So, okay. So banking and borrowing, that's kind of the deal there. Both of them are supposed to be one-way transactions. Okay. Meaning once a point gets banked, it's there till it dies. Okay. Till it's used or till it dies. Once a point gets borrowed, it's in the new use year until it dies. Okay. That is the official rules of DVC. It has been that way since the beginning of time, is best I can recollect.
Yep. The only time I've ever seen them, other than this last couple weeks, make some changes, is when the formal hurricane policy is implemented. At that point, they'll do some different stuff in terms of helping things out. But other than that, yeah, you move a point, it's a one-time thing. And so the one thing that I like to tell people too, when it comes to banking, so say I want to book a trip in a future use year and I know I want to bank points for that trip. If you go book the trip now, say you hit 11 months, you go book the trip without manually banking your points first, it will not use those points that are sitting in the current use year. You have to go in and manually move those forward before you hit book the trip. I want to make sure people understand that.
Yeah, that's true. Again, it gets back to our principle of the Wayne Gretzky deal. You got to move the points to where the reservation's going to be. Okay. Yep. And it has to be moved there before you can book the reservation.
Well, and the nice part, I mean, and people get this a little bit confused because when you're in a borrowing scenario, say you're trying to borrow, it will prompt you during the booking process to borrow. So people are in there booking their trip and they're like, oh, I'm short 5 points, and it tells them you can borrow the points. When you're in a situation where you want to use banked, it will not warn you at all. It doesn't say, hey, you have points left over here. Do you want to move them forward? You have to make sure you do that ahead of time. If you don't, it's going to pull from the current use here, and then you got a whole mess of trying to sort it back out later.
Yeah, that is like really, really unfortunate, right? When it gets that complicated, when you start canceling reservations that have banked and borrowed points, the good news is if they're all your points and they're all on your contracts and you haven't muddied the water with transfers and you go to rebook a vacation, the DVC systems are smart enough to try to use the banked points first. And then it tries to come in and use any borrowed points that's sitting in there. And last but not least, it will come back in and use the current use year points. And that's because the current use year points are movable. If you don't need them, you could still bank them to next year. But the borrowed and the bank points are there permanently. Yep. So it's going to try to prioritize and use them first for the member's best interest.
But to give you an example, one thing that kind of catches people off guard, they think that happens automatically with everything. Well, I'll give you an example. Say I'm booking a trip. I have a trip booked. We'll use your February use here because it's an easy one. Say I've got a trip booked next March. Well, I can't really book. We'll just say next February, February 26th or something like that because we're right on it. And I use the current use year points for that trip, and then I decided I'm like, you know what? I don't need my points for this year. I'm going to bank them into next year. It will not automatically apply that banking to that trip. You have to call DVC and say, hey, I banked some points after I booked this trip. Can you guys move them around and free up the good ones to make sure they do that? Because if you don't, then you'll have those banked ones just sitting there. And then all of a sudden that trip gets here, you go on that trip and you're like, oh, well, I'm going to bank my next ones forward. And they're like, well, you already used those. The banked ones are sitting here already and we can't bank them again.
Yeah. So that's called a point reallocation.
Yes.
Okay. Where you come back in and it's really at member services discretion whether or not they pull that off for you. So be nice and ask. Okay. And a lot of times they'll do it. Sometimes they'll really follow the rules and go, no, especially if you booked it at the 11-month window and then you're trying to use other points from a different contract.
Yeah,
they're likely to say no there.
They will say yes as long as it doesn't circumvent any home resort priority or any transfer policy stuff that you played with. As long as it's the same, and if you would have booked that trip with the same points, you'd have been clear in the beginning, then it's okay.
Yeah. So, and then Jim asks, is Disney returning borrowed points to the year if they cancel in the coming weeks? And so for the COVID, they have started to return borrowed points for cancellations. Okay. Only when the resort is closed and they have canceled your vacation. Is that correct, Joe? Or can you call up and say, so I'm just afraid of COVID and I don't want to travel?
That's been the tricky part. I mean, I have called and got the official policy from one person, but I've seen some anecdotal evidence that they may be, it might be a member service rep by member service rep. How they're supposed to be handling it right this very moment is, if they have not canceled you and you're canceling voluntarily on your own, that's your own fault. And the normal banking borrowing rules still apply. That's the way it's supposed to be working. If DVC cancels your trip because of extended closures, then yes, they're moving them back as is. So I've been telling people and just saying, hey, if you've got an early May trip, right? And you're kind of like, I'm not sure what's going to happen. I've been telling people, hey, wait for Disney to actually extend the closure date to that window, and then you're in the clear. Because if they do it, they're going to do it right. But if you go in and voluntarily say, I'm just a little nervous, I don't want to deal with this, you're at the whim of the cast member doing the work right then and there, and the supervisor that's got to approve it.
Yeah. Yeah. So that part is really tricky. Coming into this other question, Paul asked, how are the extra 24-point prices determined? Is it a set price or is it different for each resort? And it is a set price. There is no home resort advantage on them because there is no home resort. They are just neutral points at the 7-month mark. Okay. So they are network points that can go anywhere in the system. Okay.
And they're $19 each. That's inclusive of tax.
Yeah. And so Jim here says, thanks. He agrees with waiting for Disney to make the decision. And then Mary points out, she goes, it is a problem for those people who have booked their vacation using banked points. And I think Disney's not being as forgiving there because those points had 2 years, 3 years of possible use. And you're waiting to the very last time to use those points. So they're looking at it like, we can't really kick the can down the road anymore. Okay.
Well, I said that what I try to tell people is we're not buying in the form of currency. It's not money. We're buying allotted periods of time. And those points have used up all allotted period of time that they are legally allowed to be used. Like it's just not possible between the public offering statements for each resort, the multi-site public offering, then obviously the timeshare laws that those are all correlated to. It's just not possible. Now, I've been telling people, watch for Disney to come up with something because they don't, if we know Disney and we know Disney well, they are a PR genius, right? They don't like bad press and they know how to make people happy. And I have a feeling they're probably trying to scheme behind the scenes on how they can make people whole some way, somehow. It's not going to be in the form of here's your points back because that's not possible. But I would not be shocked if it's, hey, we're going to cover with cash reservations, or hey, we're going to give out some freebies with a dining plan or something. I don't know. Just
or
to try to
passes or something.
Right. And it may not be a perfect, dollar for dollar equivalency, but you got to know that they're trying to come up with something that they can legally do. Because that's the first battle is can we legally pull this off without affecting other members later? And what, and they've got to see what this damage is. I mean, we're what, 2 weeks into this now, and they're saying it could be another 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks. They need to see what the total damage is before they start making concessions and helping people.
Yeah. Yeah, good point. Because again, this is a highly, highly, highly regulated industry.
It is.
Okay, so their hands are tied in a lot of things, and I love that point you just made. You got to have faith in Disney that they're going to do the right thing, and they're going to try to work with people and make things right. I think that's a really great positive note there on that deal. Okay, and the other part of it is if you're watching this show and you're one of the poor, unfortunate people that had a May trip or something coming up that's going to be canceled in the future, no, you're not alone. Okay. Join one of these positive, supportive groups like the My DVC Points community group and post in there. You'll start to see other people. You're not on an island on your own. And that's part of the other reason why we're trying to do this as community members, is just reach out and go, hey man, we feel the pain with you. We want to help you understand what it is that you bought, how the rules are applying, and to really look at this and go, yeah, DVC is doing the best they can with what they have to work with.
Yep.
So Shannon asked a really good question here. She goes, I'm stuck on membership versus contract, but that might be for another day. And I think, Joe, we opened that can of worms. So
I'll try to simplify. How about this? So what makes a membership? A membership is defined by the people that are on the deed. Okay. Usually it's a husband-wife couple. That's, probably the most common way it goes. But sometimes it can be siblings. Like for example, I've got my parents' contract, which is my mom, my dad, and all three of us siblings are on there as well. So that's the one component that defines what a membership is. The other one is use here. Put those two things together, and that's how we have a membership. In the end, if you buy a different use year, so say I've got 2 use years of my own. I've got December and I've got February. So I have 2 separate memberships because me and my wife have a February use year and a December. Well, then I get a third membership because I'm on my parents' deed, which is all the different names. So those are the 2 components that define membership. Contract are all underneath each one. Okay. So membership is the big umbrella. Contracts are all the little things underneath. That's how I put it.
Yeah, that's a really good deal. So when you buy a contract, whether it's direct or resale, you will get assigned a membership number. Okay. And so in order for another contract to get on the same membership number, it has to be titled the same. So all of the owners have to be the same, and it has to be the same use year. Okay. If you change an owner or you change a use year, you're going to get a second membership number. Okay. And that's not always a bad thing, because you'll start to see a lot of these rules are limited per member number. Okay. So like Moonlight Magic, that's a limitation per member number. Okay. How many wait lists you have? It's 2 per member number. Okay. So multiple
One-time use points.
one-time use points. So there's a lot of good reasons to have multiple member numbers. Okay. There's a pro side and then there's a downside. The
I think that's a
downside
whole
is
video.
what's that?
I think we could probably
Yeah.
do a whole podcast just on that one topic.
Oh yeah. Well, the downside of it is if you want to combine points from this contract, from this member number and this member number, you have to call member services to transfer them, and they're not available on your dashboard. You can't see them. Member services has to do everything, which means if you're trying to snipe that room at 8 o'clock at the 7-month mark, it ain't going to happen until member services opens up at 9. Okay. So there's really good pros and cons to both everything. You just have to make an informed and educated decision, which is the number one underlying theory of this whole My DVC Points platform.
Yeah,
Okay.
The one simple thing I say with when it comes to if you're considering, like, say you found like a great contract, resale contract, and like I want it, but it's a different use here. The one fundamental thing you need to look at is, do I plan to combine these points with my other existing points? If I do, don't go different use here. It's not worth the headache at all. It's a pain in the butt. If you can use them independently, like I use one contract for other times of the year and another one for different ones. If you can use them separately, then it's easy peasy. It's not that big of a deal.
Right. And there's benefits to it. Okay. You know, it wouldn't bother me at all to have my Grand Cal contracts on another use year, because the only place I ever use them is Grand Cal. Okay. That's it. So, and I've heard of like Run Disney addicts having multiple use years so that they can do the January event, the February event, the April event, and the October event. And they can always be in bankable points. Okay. To where if they have to cancel 31 days out, they can always bank the points. That's a really great use case for somebody who's coming at multiple times a year.
Yep.
Okay. And then Mary comments, she says, I like having 2 numbers. So, okay. And Vicky says, so many benefits of having different member numbers, with the big downfall, combining them is a complete pain in the rear. Okay.
Yes, it is.
And so that's just it. If you ever have to combine them, not a great deal. But okay, I think we've covered banking and borrowing, and we've covered one-way transactions. There's technically no unborrowing. And let's come, and we've already somewhat hit on this. We'll shift gears here to making a reservation and how to book. Okay. We'll bring up that little FAQ if we could there, Gina. And I guess it's a great segue from the multiple deals. So if you can book this reservation yourself online, you can get early access before you have to wait for the member services to open, which I think is probably why they don't open till 9 a.m. is to just say, encourage everybody to self-book. Okay.
Absolutely.
I mean, if I was designing a call center, that's what I would end up doing. I would put the carrot out there to DIY and then have us be the backup.
And they've gotten, I mean, they've been pushing the website. When we saw the conversion over to the current format, was it probably 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago? Prior to that, even you could tell that they're starting to get that way, but it was a lot harder to book online. Now, I mean, between the new format and the modifications tool and all that stuff, they're shoving as much of as we can to the website. Just do. I'm surprised they haven't implemented things like buying one-time use points. I'm surprised that's not even on there yet.
Yeah, who knows? It could be coming back in, so you don't have to call. Okay.
Yeah.
And I would say somebody's looking at how many phone calls they get on that topic and determining what it costs to do that and seeing if it's worth it to cost to put that functionality into the website.
Yep.
But anyways, here's a great little link on things to know about booking and how to book from the DVC website. It's some really good understanding, and we'll just put that into the Facebook Live and YouTube comments there, Vicky, and we'll kind of move on. But I think most people get the 11-month window. That's your home resort where your contract is. Another frequently asked question is, well, if I own 2 contracts and I own Beach Club and I own Bay Lake Tower, can I use my Beach Club points at the 11-month window at Bay Lake Tower? And the answer is no. Okay. There is no combining of points until the 7-month window across resorts.
Yep.
Okay. Now, if they're different contracts but the same home resort, you can transfer them and do it. Okay. Because they keep their home resort priority, but then you're going, well, they're different use years. You got to line up the use years. It's a pain. Okay. It's just, there's a reason why direct guides tell you stick to your existing use year. It just makes everything so much easier.
It does.
Okay.
It just gets tricky because, I mean, as some of you probably have, maybe not all use years are created equal, right? In the terms of DVC is heavily loaded certain use years with, I think February and December are loaded with in terms of availability of points. They sold a lot more points in those use years, whereas I've noticed a lot of like August tends to have a very low percentage. And so for those of you that have like an August use year and you're trying to find a resale contract, it can be tricky sometimes. So I get why people end up just diving in and doing whatever they have to do just because they can't find points in the use year they want. So.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And so Singh asks a really great question here. She goes, is there a maximum number of nights you can do per booking? I see something on the website saying up to 7 nights. Joe, do you want to hit this one?
Sure. So the rules are you're allowed to book up to 7 nights at the exact window when your booking window opens. So let's take the 11-month example. If I was wanting to book a reservation this morning at 8 a.m. Eastern time, I could book as far out as next February 25th for a check-in date. I could book up to 7 nights. So February 25th through whatever that puts us at, March 3rd or whatever. So 7 total nights. I can't go any more than 7. Okay. At the 7-month mark, if you're doing an alternate resort, say I'm trying to book a different resort with my points at 7 months, the same 7-night cap rule is still in play. Now, the way you work around that is you book the 7 nights. Say you want to go for 8 nights. You book the 7, and then you come back tomorrow morning and you modify that resort reservation to the 8th night and you get them all. Okay. So the most you can actually carry, I think I want to say 30 days consecutively is the maximum you're allowed to carry on and in terms of a reservation. That comes, the reason they have that is you start to get into like squatters' rights, I guess, and stuff like that, where, people can try to start claiming residency if they stay in a place too long. So DVC requires you to check in and check out if you want to stay more than 30, if you've got the points for that.
And I've actually talked with people who have that, and they say, yeah, DVC tells us to go to the park, and they send somebody to our room and they move all of our stuff outside of the room. They set it down. And then they come and we've technically moved out, and then they move all of our stuff back into the room and put it right back in place for us.
Yep.
So
it's pretty crazy.
Yeah. That's just
so 7 nights at the exact window. That's the thing and so a lot of people will go on there, you get this question a lot, and it always happens for me, I'm Central Time. So it's 7:00. It's always like 7:02. I'm getting people popping up on the various Facebook groups saying, hey, I'm getting this booking error. I'm at my 11-month window. And I say, if you're trying to do more than 7 nights, it's going to kick you back. You can only use 7 and then come back again and add and then add and add until you're done with adding on.
Yeah. It's always 7 nights into the window.
Yep.
Okay. Now, if you start on and you're not right at the 11-month mark, okay, let's say you're a week past the 11-month mark. You could book, if you're 7 days past 11-month, you could book 14 days out there. Yep. Because you would be booking the first 7 days, which are not restricted, plus an additional 7 days into the 11-month window, right? It's 7 nights into the 11-month window or 7 months into the 7-month window is how I tend to look at that and explain that and kind of help people there.
Yep.
So Jim asked a funny question. 30 days, is that a Tinkerbell type reservation? That is definitely a Tinkerbell hooked you up with some points.
There are some people. I ran into a gentleman that's owned about as long. He bought into Beach Club back when we did. And he, instead of buying a retirement home, he's just been buying DVC points. And he's at 2,400 and change. And he spends 4 months a year retired at Disney. I'm like, I better start saving right now.
Yeah. That's the DVCK plan, I guess, right?
Yeah. It's impressive.
Yep. Okay. So let's start to come into this. And so we talked about making reservations, and now we'll talk about canceling reservation and get to Vicky's question here.
Yes.
Still covering holding accounts. So, okay. When we looked at and I'll bring that back up on the screen share. Okay. So that you can start to see that. Okay. So I told you guys as well, when we talked about this, like in order for you to book points out of the the ninth month into your use year, you have to do it 31 days in advance so that because you can't bank points that are canceled within your holding period. So let's define what the holding period is. Okay. That is if you're canceling a reservation between 1 and 30 days out, it goes into what's called a holding account. Okay. And the holding account actually just means that your points are in holding. Okay. And you have 60 days to rebook a reservation in that time frame. Okay. 60 days to book another reservation. Now, what do you think the big problem is trying to book a reservation at DVC 60 days out? Okay.
Pretty tough.
It's availability. Okay. The question is there going to be something that you fit into that you want within the next 60 days that comes open? Okay. That's the big thing there is, and as well at 60 days out. Okay. Disney has a right to come back in and start renting out those points for what's called breakage.
Yep.
Okay. So at 60 days out, if we haven't claimed our rooms, Disney has the right to come back in and rent those rooms out for cash to non-members. And they use the first 2% of the operating. Is it like 2%, Joe?
Yeah. 2% of the net. It's a pretty big number. It's like $500 to $700 per resort annually, but I think it's 2% of, you're right on track there.
It's 2% of the operating budget. Okay. Yeah. So they will pay back the members the first 2% of the operating budget to offset our dues. Okay. Once that 2% threshold is met, they keep 100% of the money.
Yep.
Okay. So it's really in Disney's best interest for them to have breakage and be renting out our resorts that we paid for when we're not using them. Yep. Okay. So that's the gotchas of the holding account. The holding account is there to say, hey, look, you canceled at the last minute. You tied up this room from other members for God knows how long, up to 11 or 7 months. And now at the last minute, you're canceling. So we'll open it back up for everybody else. But the points that you used to hold this, now they're in a jail, so to speak, and they're penalized and they have to be used in 60 days or they die. Okay. That's what a holding account is. And that's how you get them. And I don't even think you can take points from a holding account and transfer to RCI.
They can. You can.
They
actually.
can?
Yeah.
Okay.
But the holding restriction goes with them. So you're still stuck with trying to book a week in RCI with holding points. It makes things tough. And I want to clarify too. So let's use an example of somebody who's traveling early in their use year, right? Say you got your February use year and you're traveling, say your trip's February 15th and you cancel inside 30, the 30 to 1 day window. You get a holding tag locked on all those points the moment you make that cancellation. Now, those points are still valid for the entire rest of that use year, okay? They're good from February 1st of that use year till January 31st the following use year. The tricky part is just booking 60 days in advance. So you're sitting there always checking the calendar, seeing who's canceled, trying to see, if you can slide one in, because as you all know, even inside 5 or 6 months, things get really tight, let alone inside 60 days. So, and it's 60 days from check-in, just like the other booking procedures follow.
Yeah. And Vicky asked this other really good question here. She goes, clarification, you have 60 days to book something, or can you book something only 60 days out, but until the end of your use year? There's 2 rules here. Okay. You have 60 days to do it, but the points also expire at the end of the use year, which is why on this chart, let me come back in and we'll add this back up here. Okay. On this chart here, Vicky, you start to see I have labeled, like for my February use year right here, occasionally my wife gets a weekend off in February and it can't, or in January. And so we have a February use year and you can see January 31st, our points die. They like go to the graveyard. If they are not used by then, they die. Well, one year we booked a treehouse trip that was January 24th through the 27th. Okay. And so had we had to cancel that reservation, I have those in red because I would have had like 2 or 3 days to rebook the points someplace before they expired on January 31st. Okay. That's why it's always really dangerous to be booking right before your use year begins. And again, back at the beginning of the show, Joe gave the really great advice. You always want a use year that begins right before your primary vacation season begins. Okay. Because if you're in a holding account, you've got the holding account rules that you're held to, and you've got the use year life limit rules that also apply. So I think that kind of answered that question there.
Yeah, the big thing to remember is holding points are not bankable. You can't move them forward again. So, I mean, you've got to figure out. So if you're going to have that tough window of only 60 days to book a trip in advance, you're going to have a hard time with that. You want to try to give yourself as much time as possible to try to piece something together along the way. If you find yourself, say you've got a February use year and you cancel a trip and you've only got December and January to play with. Well, we know what life's like trying to book in December and January, even 11 months out, with marathon and everything else. Good luck. You're just not going to happen. You can almost say bye-bye to those points. There's just no chance.
Yeah, because not only do you have, the peak December everybody travel season, but you follow it back up with the marathon weekend, and then you follow it up with January as the low point season. So a lot of members specifically wait to travel until January. Hopefully they're not doing it with a February use year. Okay. So
holding is just a parking space. It's really what it is. You canceled on DVC last minute. Now you got to use your points last minute. That's the big thing to understand. But the nice part, so to kind of cover specifically what's going on right now with all this COVID stuff, obviously most of these people canceling trips right now are not canceling out of their own decision, right? It wasn't your fault for canceling on DVC because you were forced to. So right now they're not implementing holding at all. I mean, it's just flat out. They're just keeping it out of the window, and they're allowing people to have some flexibility because they realize if they force somebody to cancel a reservation and then slap a holding tag on it, they're basically saying, sorry, we don't really care about you at all. At least with taking the holding restriction off, you have some flexibility to book.
Yeah. Yep. So that's what's going on there with holding accounts and cancellations. So just to clarify, if you even modify a reservation and you go from something, I did this back in February. I went from a 2-bedroom over at Old Key West to a 1-bedroom standard view a 2-bedroom standard view at Jumbo popped up. Okay. Within like a week of us going, I was like, well, we've been to Old Key West multiple times. We haven't been to Jumbo. Let's modify the reservation and move over to Jumbo. Great. But it was 2 nights and it was 4 points cheaper. So I had 4 points left into a holding account.
Yep.
Okay.
Anything, it's always nice when you're doing a modification. If you're going up in points, you're fine. It's not going to make a difference. But if you're going down in point totals inside that 30-day window, those are going to follow holding, and you can't do anything with them. You can't bank them. You can't do anything with them.
Yep. And so luckily right after that, a 2-bedroom Savannah View opened up over at Kidani, and we said, well, we'd rather be at Savannah View because it's it was planned to be a vacation without the parks. Okay. Like a resort only stay. So we were like, if we're doing resort only, it makes sense to pay for the animal views. Absolutely. So that's kind of how we ended up looking at that. Okay. And so, cancellations here, modifying, it's pretty much the same rules. 31 plus days out, points are returned to the use year of the reservation. Remember that Wayne Gretzky principle we told you? You got to put the points where the reservation is going to be. Well, once you put the points there, they're there. Just because you move the reservation doesn't mean that the points automatically move. Okay. The points are stuck in the use year that they were moved to or banked to or borrowed to. So if I wanted to modify that treehouse trip January 24th into February, I can't do it at anything before September 30th at my banking window. Okay. So I could not cross that use year to do that. So that's kind of goes there. We covered holding accounts. And I really like your analogy here, Joe, that it's a parking space for Disney Vacation Club points, or if I go to back to hockey, it's kind of like the penalty box.
It is.
Okay.
It's exactly what I was going to use.
Like-
that. You've been using the hockey example. That's perfect.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
You're from Detroit. I get it. That makes
yeah,
sense.
Detroit and yeah, hockey town. So yeah, we're gonna talk hockey here. So even though nobody's watching hockey this time of year, so
No, that's for sure.
nope. So okay, we covered holding accounts, and then given what we know here and all of this flexibility, we kind of touched on this earlier, Joe, with the flexibility and the grace that people are doing. And what I kind of see from the forums that are out there, it's almost like members are expecting this massive amount of pixie dust saying it's just Disney. They should just wave a magic wand and pixie dust and give me my points back and make everything useful. And
they see people getting cash reservations refunded out till June, for example. It's like, oh, why can't we just have the same type of thing?
Well, because you could have always canceled a cash reservation this far in advance in June. Okay. Right. But you're not dealing with a cash system. You're dealing with a point economy. Okay. And we've already covered, there's all these timeshare laws and regulations and how regulated these guys are. Okay. Not to mention that in a hotel business, Disney knows they're not going to have 98% occupancy year round. Okay. And that's the percentage of people are sleeping in their beds every night. It's like 98% for DVC, the occupancy rate.
Yep. That's timeshare world for you.
And that's because they sold 100%. Okay. They sold 100% of what they could sell. They held a few points back themselves to rent out for cash, but believe you me, they're getting their cash for that. So you're really talking about a resort that runs at dang near capacity every night. Absolutely. Okay. Now what ends up happening is, let's say we take worst case scenario. Let's hope it's worst case scenarios, 4 months out of the equation. Okay. If there is 60 million points out there, which by my math, I'm not that far off.
No, it's pretty close. Yeah.
Right. So if there's 60 million points out there and nobody can spend a point for 4 months. Okay.
It's 15 million points. No, more than that. 20 million points.
Yeah, that's 20 million points that are out there, okay, that are out there in the economy. And so over the course of 2 years, instead of having 60 million points a year in and out, now you've got, 120 million points out there, okay, and then what was that, 100 points out there worth of booking space?
Yeah.
Okay. So you're trying to fit 120 million points in the space of 120. Okay, guys, it's gonna get ugly. Okay.
Very ugly.
And my best advice is for 2021, 2022, 2023, you need to be booking your vacations using your 11-month window on the nose. Okay. And you need to be scrapping for that reservation, because those who wait are not going to be able to find points, just simply due to the excess of points in the economy, unless, to Joe's point earlier tonight, Disney comes up with some other creative ways to pull points out of the economy with some kind of other trade or incentive or something along those lines. Okay.
Yeah. I think I've kind of used the example. Every week that goes by is one more week. So that's 1/52nd, right? Let's just do easy math. 50 weeks out of the year. That's 2% of the total points. Every week that goes by, that's 2% that's being funneled for another time of year, either this year or push forward to next year. That starts stacking up, and it's going to be a situation where people already complain they already have trouble booking. The people that don't book at 11 months are not going to book at all. Like you're going to lose these points whether you're losing them now or you're going to lose them in 2 years, because you're not. There's going to be nothing to book.
Yeah. So that's our advice on this: is bank early. Okay. Because the other lever that DVC has here, and I don't know that they would do this, but it's definitely out there. They have the ability to look at this and go, there are too many points in the economy right now. We are going to freeze banking and borrowing. Okay.
I really think that's coming, honestly. If this drags out. So the math that I was using, Disney on pretty close is about 2%. Their ownership's about 2% per resort that they have, at least in Florida. I think it's 4% for Hilton Head. Well, let's use the 2% example. within just a couple weeks of closures, if Disney tries to absorb all of that loss of use with their own points, only after a couple weeks, they can't do it anymore. There's nothing left. And by the way, that means they're not renting any cash rooms for another year. They're not going to do the Saratoga refurb anymore. They're going to have to stop that until they can recoup all that loss of inventory. So after a couple weeks, they can't do anything else. So then every week, every time that goes by, there's going to push even more points and more points forward, to where it's going to be impossible. I mean, there's just going to be way too many points in a system. And that's when you've got to hope that they start thinking outside the box and sitting there saying, we've got way too many points in this system. Banking's got to stop. So they shut that off. And I mean, and they can shut that off with anybody. People don't realize if you look at the multi-use public offering statement, they have the ability to shut off banking and borrowing completely. No more. And you have to use the points in the year they're originally allotted, and that's it. So you got to hope it doesn't get that bad, because you got to think there's a lot of people that have bought with the intent to bank and borrow and go every couple 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, that's like a drastic measure, but it is in the contract that they could do that if they needed to.
Yeah.
So I've been holding on to some points because I use my Grand Cal points every other year, like we established earlier. I use that for home court advantage. Okay, so I'm thinking I'm going to be banking my February use year points for this year now. Okay, while I still can. Okay, just in case they pull the trigger on that. Okay, that's kind of my take on it as to how I think this is going to come down and get ugly. Okay,
Yeah.
just in case.
If it rolls for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, I mean, they're going to have to pull the plug.
They're going to have to pull points out of the economy somehow, or somehow enforce the restrictions. So, right. Yeah, it really could be an option. It's contractually there, that we're not just theoretically making this stuff up. Okay. But Vicky says no banking or borrowing. This is really fueling my add-on-itis. And well, we're known to do that around here, Vicky. So just hang out with us, and it's pretty contagious. So Jim
Don't
says,
get me wrong. I think that's I think that scenario is the last thing DVC wants to do. I think they want to try to think of other solutions outside the system first before they take it to that drastic of measures. Like I said, I mean, you got to think that if this drags out and the economy takes a pretty bad hit, there's going to be a lot of cash rooms available resort wide, right? At Port Orleans and all these different places. If DVC can get buy-in from Disney Parks and Resorts as far as using cash rooms and floating some inventory, that may be some options. Because the getting rid of banking and borrowing would be the first time it's ever happened. That's never happened before.
no.
And I think it would be very much one of those moments of, it would scare a lot of people out.
Yeah.
Like, oh, they can do this. I'm getting out. And it would scare a lot of people from buying in. So I think that's like the red button that they don't want to have to push unless they absolutely have to.
Yeah, but Jim asked this question here. He goes, what if they offered a deal, example, a 1-bedroom villa plus a few more points, but fewer than that regular 1-bedroom price? Can they play with the point charts here to pull more out, Joe? I don't think they can.
Not with the published point charts. No, I mean, now that the use year has started, now they could start playing with the point charts for the future in terms of, but I don't see how that would really help them in terms of balancing and taking care of this excess. They play with the point charts to help try to accommodate demand as it grows and changes. We've seen that with various point reallocations on the charts. But in the end, you're still getting close to that 96, 97, 98% occupancy either way. So by playing with the point charts, I don't think they're going to push points out of the system that, just magically. I think people just end up using them still in the end, no matter what.
Yeah, and Paula makes this comments here. If they cancel banking, it seems they won't be selling many contracts and resale prices will drop. It will definitely cripple some of the product. Okay. And I think that will have a negative impact on sales of all kinds. Okay. Now, like I said, we think that's going to be like a last case resort scenario, but I think I'm going to prepare for it just because I was planning on banking the points anyways.
Yeah, I think it's just one of those things. If you're in a spot right now where You're getting in. Remember, we can't bank a point until we actually get to the use year the point originally sits in. You can't do that until at least the first day of the use year. If you're in a situation where you're like, I'm probably not going to travel the rest of this year, and then all this COVID stuff has probably made you like, yeah, I'm definitely not traveling the rest of this year. Get your banking done. Just don't be like, I'm waiting till the deadline and then I'm going to push the button. Just get it done. Just get it behind you, and you won't have to worry about it, because you don't want to be in that spot where you're like, I'm gonna push it out. I'm just gonna wait till the very end, and all of a sudden, the day before you go to do it, they drop the rule, and you're like, why didn't I just take care of this in the past?
Yeah.
So because there's no difference whether you bank a point on day one of your use year or the very last day of your banking window. There's no difference there. So in the sense of just move it if you don't think you're going to use it.
And Jim brings up this other good point here as well. This will force people just to get a room to move up from a studio to a 1-bedroom, or a 1-bedroom to a 2-bedroom, or a 2-bedroom to a grand villa. I think that's how we end up selling out the bungalows, the cabins, the grand villas that are super point expensive. People end up looking at it going, well, I've got to use my points somehow. I'm going to come back in and do this. Yeah.
And I think you'll see that. And I think, but as I said, in the grand scheme of things, if you look at resort usage, 98% would be pure 100. That would be as many member bookings as possible. But I would say that if you go back and look at most, you're probably still looking at 95% usage across the full year, even with all those high point room categories. So it's not going to move the dial much.
No, because we were already really, really packed, and I've heard 98%. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I would say between 95 and 98%. So you're sitting there on 60 million points, even on my low end so you're talking 3%. What is that? You're talking 1.8 million. So, I mean, it's not going to swing that many points. It's not. I mean, it may force some people that would normally book a studio to book a 1-bed, or maybe a 1-bed to 2-bed, but in the end, those rooms were going to get booked either way.
Yeah, and Dan brings up this point. He goes, it would be great if they offered deals on Disney Cruise Line where using points to cruise actually made sense to flush points out of the system. A guy can dream, right? Yeah, but let's just look at those floating Petri dishes out there, okay? They're kind of the COVID brunt of all of this, right?
Which may give them that is a really good, and I was talking to somebody the other day about it, how the ability to move points over, maybe DVC steps back and says, for the next 2 years, we're going to remove the usage restriction on resale contracts. Because right now, if you buy a resale contract, you can't use it on cruises. You can't use it in the other hotels. If they pulled that back for just a couple of years and allowed all the resale members over the last couple decades to use, or since 2011 when they've implemented that rule, to use those points outside, I think it would allow a lot more points to get pushed out of the system. And as I said, I think that if the economy takes a big enough hit, Disney's going to be trying to find ways to fill those rooms anyways. If they can't cash buyers, then why not?
And if DCL can't fill those cruise ships, then that's a really great way to come back in and fill the cruise ship with some of these prepaid points. So
Absolutely.
Hopefully you get some executives talking there. If because of COVID, everybody's canceling cruises and they can't fill the ships, that might be a way to pull points out of the system and
maybe they do a special member cruise and try to pull as many points for a member cruise as possible and make it an affordable one. Because right now the member cruises are crazy high. Make it a reasonable one where it gets people excited and they pull enough points out of the system to kind of flush this thing clean.
Yeah. So John says maybe they could just take a loss on the developer-owned points. I think you mentioned that. I don't see that likely. They tend to like their profit in cash. Okay.
And I think that they're probably absorbing as much as they can as it is. As I said, if they're controlling 2% of each resort, after a couple of weeks they're gone. It doesn't matter. And that's and if they do that, then as I said, they've got to stop the Saratoga refurb, because that's where Disney covers those rooms while they're out of inventory for members. It's that Disney's covering it from their end. They would have to, all those little things, they'd have to, for maintenance, there would be no maintenance budget to pull rooms out for that type of reason. So I think that they probably already did that. And I was telling you, if we looked back at right after all the closures were starting to be announced, they were allowing unborrowing, they were allowing banking past the deadline, all this other stuff. And then they quickly changed their mind. And I think it was one of those situations like, well, we can buffer this. We can buffer this. And all of a sudden they're like, no, we can't. We can't do this more than like a week and a half, 2 weeks. And then we're stuck. And so that's when they reined everything back in terms of the rules, because they realized we can't handle this by ourselves. There's just no way. the math does not work.
Yeah. Yeah. Paula asked the question here, could they take away your banked points? And I think the answer there is no. Once they're banked, they can't come back in and change the rules on you.
No, they can just change the rule as far as if you haven't done it already.
Yeah. But once you bank them, they're subject to availability. Okay. So Jim says maybe the poly bungalows will have people waving to the ferry boats in the morning and you'll see lights on there. So
I think you're going to see a lot of people taking trips like that where it's going to be one of those years where like, I would never normally book a bungalow or a cabin, but this is the year.
Yep. This is the year. And then Dan says, thanks. He'll take a 5% cut on this idea from Disney. And Marianne says free cruise for Dan. So, okay. John says, he goes, I mean, the points owned from buybacks, not just the 2% by law, plus declaring all the deeds at Riviera.
The Riviera, I was going to say the Riviera points they could, as far as all the undeclared inventory there, they can't play with the stuff that they bought back because those come with various restrictions that when they buy something back, all the points still are allotted in certain use years and they don't play with that stuff at all. And you'd be surprised. There's not that much when in terms of what Disney has that they're ready to resell. That it's a pretty small number. It's not something that would buffer a complete zero inventory for even more than a day.
And so Vicky asked, how soon can you borrow points? And Vicky, I have borrowed my Saratoga points for February 1st. And remember, I have a February use year. So I've borrowed next year's points on the first day of this year. That is the soonest you can borrow a point. And I can tell you, I have done it.
Yep.
Because my Saratoga points are the first ones I use. Okay. As soon as I can strip that contract out, I do it because it's just the least desirable 11-month window that I have. So that's how I use that contract. It's my 7-month go-to. Okay.
Yeah. You can borrow, it's one of those things like take a trip that's February for your February use year. Say you check in on February 1st of 2021. You could seriously go back and book that trip on March 1st of this year. So 24 days ago, and you could have borrowed all the way from 2022.
Yep.
So
yep.
you're talking the very farthest you could borrow, like theoretically would be, what is that? 23 months.
Yeah. And Marianne says they're not buying much back right now. And that's because the parks are down and that's their primary sales spot. Okay. Is park traffic. Okay. That is their number one source of leads and everything else. And so they're not buying them back because they're not getting any leads out of the parks right now. They're just having to work on all of their existing leads. So
not to mention, I'm sure budgets are blown already this year. They're probably not liking it.
Oh, no. Yeah. Financially, things are a mess over there. I think we've covered all that we set out in our agenda to cover tonight. We'll give these guys a couple of last opportunities to ask a question and see if we can't answer it. We like doing this as a special live because I think the content is, well, it's just a little bit more boring unless you really have good questions to ask. So we'd rather have a nice debate over what resort we're going to buy, borrow, and kill, and all that kind of fun stuff. So, and into the nuances of consuming the product as opposed to the administrative details here. So if you guys have another question, go ahead and ask. Meanwhile, I want to start to wrap up the show and thank Gina. Okay. Throw her in here as well. Gina, you're still on mute. So I want to thank Gina for producing the show tonight, doing some of the screen shares and the back end research and all of the links and things that you see happening on the screen. Thank you, Gina.
Welcome.
So, and then we will come back in and do this one last question here. So, Jim, I think he mentioned this earlier. He goes, First of all, I haven't called yet, but the Travel X insurance is coverage for an entire year contract. If for year, does it cover a single DVC contract for me as a member who has 2 contracts? So, Joe, do you use this product? I do.
So I haven't. I'm one of those people that I never cancel. I've probably never done it just because, hey, if I book a dang trip to Disney, I'm going to Disney. But part of the reason I haven't done it either was a lot of times I'm pulling from multiple use years. And so the first thing that people have to understand when you're buying the DVC travel insurance is it's per use year, not per trip. So if you're pulling points from a banked season, a regular and borrowed, you got to pay it 3 times for that one, just to cover that one trip.
It's per member number per use year.
Yep.
Okay. So a guy like yourself would have to buy it for every use year and every member number.
Yeah, exactly.
And when we looked at this, my wife really fell in love with the policy and wanted us to buy it. And we looked at multiple use years and we went, oh my gosh, we can cover 14 contracts all on the same member number with one policy.
Yes.
Okay. So there is no upper limit as to how many points this thing would cover. So if your guy with 2,400 points had them all on the same use year, he's getting $2,400 worth of vacation travel covered,
which is worth it.
Yeah, for like $99 or $106 or whatever it is now.
Like for me, it's a mess. Like I've got this trip coming up if it happens in June, and I'm pulling from 2 membership numbers, and I'm banked, borrowed, and current from both membership numbers. So I'm talking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'd have to buy it 6 times for one trip. So it's just like we're kind of getting into the return on investment is just not there.
Well, the good news is it would cover everything that you used from those contracts from those use years.
Right.
But if you're blowing out all of those points on one massive Grand Villa trip, that's where you're at.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I think it's a valuable thing. So for people that fly, I mean, shoot, it can be worth it just in that sense because it covers things like lost bags and, canceled flights and all that other stuff unrelated to the DVC component. For us specifically, we drive most of the time. So, I don't get the benefits there of losing bags or anything like that. So outside of the DVC points specific, there's not a lot for me to have to worry about. I don't travel during hurricane season all that often. I mean, it's happened a few times, but it's definitely a cool product in the sense that it's specifically tailored to DVC. I mean, that's what it's designed for. And it's the one type of thing I've heard there's other ones out there, but it's the one that's going to help you get some money back for points lost. Now you're not going to get it all, but you're going to get some.
Yeah. The main thing that they do there is they pretty much just give you back what's close to your membership dues.
Yep.
The value of the points themselves are gone. Okay. You're not getting that back, which I think is a little on the unfair side. But it does cover airfare, lost bags. One of my friend's dog, they were staying with me in a 1-bedroom, and their dog had to go to the emergency room. So his wife wanted to fly home on an emergency basis. They would have covered that had I submitted it, and I didn't think to, but he ended up just using frequent flyer miles for it. Okay, as his emergency get her home to be with the dog. But the policy would have covered that. Okay, so again, we're fans of it. We haven't had to file a claim yet, but I'm looking at how they put all these Corona restrictions in here. And that to me really cheapened the policy quite up. But
yeah, something like you had to have it bought by like January 24th is the thing I've heard to even have even a chance to claim against it, just because that's when the virus was officially, announced or whatever here. It's like every insurance, right? I mean, there's riders and all these little things you got to look at and little nuances, but it sounds like they do a pretty good job of taking care of people. I've heard of people that have had issues and they call and they make it easy. So,
yeah. And it's all done through member services. Okay. It's sold through member services and you file your claims through member services. Okay. So that part makes it nice, simple, and easy. We had another couple questions about the spreadsheet. I know for a fact right now it's in the My DVC Points community group. So if you join that group and you go to the file section, the file will be there. It'll also be on the show notes for this at mydvcpoints.com/live. And if you scroll back in, there's a special tab there that has all the latest live shows where you can see the embed from YouTube and show notes and things along those lines. So that's about it. I haven't seen any more new comments tonight. So we'll go ahead and wrap this up. And Joe, thank you for joining me tonight. And thank you for being our guest. And thank you guys for all tuning in. We appreciate you guys as an audience and really are here to just serve you. So thanks, everybody, and have a great night.
See ya. Bye.
Bye.